Good evening and welcome to the April 11th edition of the Finance and Government Operations Committee of the City Council. Council seat Feeblecorn will be serving as an alternate for Councilor Benton today, and all the other committee members are present. If you'll join us, since we're in the chambers this evening, if you'll join us for the Pledge of Allegiance, maybe I'll ask Councilor Lewis if you'll lead us in English, and Councilor Pena if you'll lead us in Spanish. Thank you to you both. This meeting is open to the public, and our mics are a little loud. This meeting is open to the public, and members of the public will be providing comments today, both in person and virtually. For those watching on our live stream, it can be accessed through our Zoom webinar or YouTube Live on most smartphones, tablets, and computers. Members of the public have had the opportunity to address the committee if they signed up for public comment per the rules published on our agenda and our website last Friday. We will call for speakers when we get to individual items if you signed up for them, although, Mr. Moya, I don't believe we have any individual items, do we? Just public comment in general?
Mr. Chair, we have signups for individual bill items.
Okay. Then in that case, here are the public comment ground rules, and we'll get to them as well when we come back. Comments are to be addressed to the committee members only. Each participant has up to 2 minutes to present, and any disruptive comment may result in removal from the meeting. We are now going to move to our first agenda item, which is EC 36. I'll move approval of EC 36, the approval of the risk second supplemental agreement to add funds to outside counsel services for Y Law, and I will move approval. Do we have a second? Thank you from Councilor Pena. Councilors, any questions or comment from the administration?
Mr. President.
Councilor Lewis.
Or, Mr. Chair, I know these are common. I guess maybe this is a discussion as we go into the budget, but. As we give resources and do these supplemental agreements or legal services, as we're also adding to the city attorney's office with new positions in the city attorney's office, and so I think the idea is that if we're growing the city attorney's office, we're adding new attorneys, that the trend on some of the outside legal services might be a little less as well. Too, and so I guess I wonder if the administration, I guess, just give us just some thoughts on. Do you see what's the trend? I mean, do we see more and more outside legal service money, going to, or do we intend to, as we grow and add more positions to the city attorney's office, do we intend to see less and less of these contracts given to outside legal services?
Ms. Keefe?
The trend has actually been in the opposite direction. We have been making efforts to expand the city attorney's office and reduce the number of outside counsel contracts over the last 4 years. But we currently have, we will always need to engage outside counsel to some extent, particularly based on their expertise or based on our workload. Y Law has particular expertise in employment law that we rely on, but we also have multiple vacancies in the city attorney's office right now, and we are going to be continuing to use outside counsel services to the extent we can to handle the caseload accordingly.
Thanks. So does the budget reflect that, or do you see it reflecting that over the next year, filling those positions and then reducing the overall amount that we're spending on outside legal services?
I don't know if I can speak to that.
Certainly, I think a discussion we'll have during our budget conversation. Thank you.
And I know we don't normally, again, thank you, Councilor Lewis. Ms. Keefe, I know we don't normally talk about these, and maybe our budget office can help us as well. But in this case, this is mostly a risk management contract. Sometimes that involves employee accident claims that have to be conflicted out. Is that my understanding? I know that's the bulk of our contract work, and this seems to be in that bucket.
I do believe a number of these cases identified are indeed conflict cases, and we do have quite a number of outside counsel who are conflict counsel who handle cases that the city attorney's office cannot.
Thank you, Ms. Keefe. And we'll follow that up. Councilors, any other questions? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is for approval. All those in favor, raise your hand and say yes.
Yes.
That carries unanimously. Thank you. We now move on to item EC 39. And I just want to be sure we have what we need. EC 39 is a submission of the 5-year forecast from FY22 to FY26. I move a receipt be noted. Do we have a second? Second from Councilor Pena. Councilors, I have a question, but any councilors before me?
Mr. President.
Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, just a comment, I guess another general question on this. Usually the flow of this 5-year forecast would be around December or so. I mean, I think it's pretty rare that we'd ever see it in April like this, especially after the budget has already been proposed. So I guess if you all could comment on, why the timing of this now, and I think that, it's my understanding that usually it's in December when, at the time, that's the purpose of it, that it would happen in December, and which is a good reflection of the way things are looking then. And then it's kind of a step to the budget proposal. So did you want to comment on that?
Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lewis, yes, you're exactly right. Ordinance states by December. We've been a little behind. We finished it in January, routed it for signatures. It got down to council in about February and was pushed to the council now in March. But yes, you're right. It should happen in December. We, over the past 2 years, have been running a little behind in budget just because of CARES and the 3 budget cycles in 2 years. But, I accept responsibility for that. We've just been a little behind, and we did complete it in January, but we're trying to catch up.
Ms. Sheridan, thank you. And I guess let me say that let us know how we can help you this next year and being able to, I guess, get this out in December. If there's some ways that we can help you as a council to be able to do that. Need some resources, and let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I see Ms. Yara and our city economist there. I just wanted to ask if someone can help me with this. Looking at the 5-year forecast that was presented from FY22 to 26, and I realize these change every 6 months, but they usually don't swing that much. From 22 to 26, we're projecting what my math shows about an 8.5% revenue increase, but a 32% expenditure increase over that forecast. I wonder if somebody can speak to why those expenditures seem to be increasing so much. Is that based on the newest budget that's presented, or is there additional funds we're expecting? What's the gap there? What's the delta?
So, Mr. Chairman, the biggest gap, and Ms. Steph, you could help me out if needed, but if you go to page 43 of the 5-year forecast, is the CIP coming online. So that's the biggest portion and the biggest increase. So every year we ask departments, hey, what's your anticipated CIP coming online? So here, from FY22 to 23, we have, it jumps from the actuals that were appropriated in 22 of $8 million, but then it jumps to $38 million and ends about $42 million. So that's the biggest increase in the expenditures. Other than that, it's standard, 2% COLA, any anticipated movements for any bargaining units. To be honest, we throw everything in the kitchen sink in the 5-year forecast, but that's the biggest jump is the CIP coming online. It's nearly $40 million.
Mr. Davis and Ms. Yara, no, that's really helpful, actually. And is that based on projects that are already funded, fully funded in our own schedule, or is that projections for where the city believes, as we just did a bond cycle, we think those will be there, we think voters would approve the second half 4 years later? How is that projected?
And Mr. Chairman, it's a combination of both. So in process and those that are anticipated to come online in fiscal year 23 forward.
And I just want to point out again, not for debate, or just want to point out as we're looking at these and working on the budget this year with our staff as well, Mr. Manish and others, I think one of my concerns is going to be that I know there's a big push for using cap for capital. We've got a lot of one-time money. We've got the opportunity to GRG bond, but we've got to keep these operating costs somewhere. And so if we put another bond cycle out, or if we expedite that capital project, the capital schedule, as it stands, according to the administration's projections for all the projects the administration wants to put out in the next 5 years, we don't have the funds to operate them. So we're going to have to figure out that delta at some point if we put more capital into this year's budget. I know there's some capital there. I know there's some GRT options. I'm supportive in general of the things we need to get done, but we definitely have to fill that gap because we're talking somewhere like $172 million gap in 5 years we would be passing off to the next city council and the next mayor. And so we've got to find a better answer for that. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, whoever that was. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Mr. Davis. Councilors, other questions? That being said, the motion on the floor is receipt be noted on EC 39. All those in favor, raise your hand and say yes. Yes. That item carries. Next up, we move on to agenda item 016. Councilor Bassan, this is a bill from you and I, and so I'll let you carry the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 016 is amending the Albuquerque Human Rights Ordinance to prohibit discrimination based on source of income, making an appropriation for a study and to develop and distribute educational materials. I would like to move it do pass.
And I'll make a second, and I see some others as well, and thank you. Councilor Bassan, if it's okay with you, I know we have some public commenters we want to get to this evening and take it, but I think we had discussed and might want to try to, our intent this evening, I think, might be to defer this until our next FGO meeting so we can take more public comment and come back to the committee incorporating their input as well. Is that okay with you this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm okay with that. I definitely would like to hear from the public tonight and hear some presentations and ask some questions so that we can start the robust conversation that I think this deserves. But I am comfortable with a deferral of 30 days. So I would like to change that to move for a deferral of 30 days. But if that's going to stop us from talking about it, I'm not moving a deferral yet.
No, we'll take that, and I'll second it for the
Okay,
purpose.
thank
Our
you.
intent is to defer, but we do want to get to public comment, both from the administration and from the public. And so, Mr. Moya, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first speaker is Evelyn Kuhn, followed by Rachel Biggs.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak, Chairman and Councilman. My name's Evelyn Kuhn, and I'm the lucky recipient of a Section 8 voucher. But I'd like to speak to the source of income discrimination in using vouchers. I'd like to move out of my present address at Central and Louisiana for safety reasons, but I need to have subsidized housing. I'm on Social Security. And as I've looked for an apartment, I've discovered that most landlords don't want to accept a voucher. I can't understand why. Coming with a voucher means that most of the rent is guaranteed. And vouchers also come with inspections, which mean tenants have to keep a clean, decent house. And although a landlord may have heard of or had a bad tenant, most of my neighbors are grateful for an affordable place, and we keep our building clean, and we're watchful of who's on the property. And some landlords have complained that vouchers come with extra paperwork, my landlord in particular. I'm asking the city council or the committee if the city can provide help and training to make it easier. I'm right now in the process of looking for an apartment, and one of the landlords I spoke with, one of the landlords I had spoken with, he was very confused about what kind of paperwork having a voucher would mean. And I myself didn't know, what kind of paperwork it involved. And so he was reluctant to consider that somebody was coming without just a check. So the training and help may make it more may make more landlords more amenable to accepting vouchers, which of course also expands their market. And can the process be more streamlined? Again, my landlord's complaint is always the paperwork.
Ms. Kuhn, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for your comments. And if unfortunately we ran out of time, but I'd love to hear more from you. If it would be okay with you, I'd like to ask Mr. Moya to share your information so that we can get some more information and try to figure that part out for you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
And Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, I do have her email, so I can pass it along to you.
That's great. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rachel Biggs, followed by Paul Heidel.
Good evening, Chair and City Council members. My name is Rachel Biggs with Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless. We are a federally qualified health center that serves approximately 7,000 people without homes every year here in Bernalillo County. Ending source of income discrimination will ensure that no one is unfairly excluded from housing because their payment mechanism is a rental subsidy, city, state, or other federal assistance. Reducing such barriers to housing will go a long way towards reducing visible homelessness in our communities and will improve the health and safety and quality of life of everyone here in our community. The lack of source of income protection has an adverse impact on some of our most vulnerable populations. We know there's an increasing population of elderly people experiencing homelessness. This is a large proportion of people using housing subsidies, paying for their rent with Social Security or disability, people living with disabilities, domestic violence survivors, ethnic and racial minorities, and veterans. Our community members should not have to endure further hardships and discrimination simply because they're using a lawful subsidy or a non-wage income to help cover their housing costs. The Urban Institute report that the city of Albuquerque paid for noted that Albuquerque has relatively few protections to prevent discrimination against tenants and recommends passing this legislation. I urge your support of O2216 to close this loophole in our human rights ordinance and thank the sponsors for bringing this forward. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Paul Heidel, followed by Kelly Sinier on Zoom.
Paul,
Good
welcome
evening.
back.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone tonight. Thank you, Councilor Davis. Thank you, councilors. My name is Paul Heidel. Up until recently, I was the deputy city attorney for policy, and when I left, I swore I would never wear a tie again unless it was very important, and this is the first time I've worn a tie since I left the city. This legislation is incredibly important. I want to thank Councilor Spasson and Councilor Davis for bringing this legislation. It's important because it's a step towards protecting the most vulnerable in our community. Similar legislation is passed across the country. I'd like to speak briefly tonight about why, from a legal perspective, it's imperative that we pass this bill. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, it's illegal to discriminate against people from certain protected categories, including race, gender, and disability. Recently, the Biden administration expanded the definition of gender discrimination in the housing context to include sexual orientation and gender identity. People who use housing choice vouchers and other alternative forms of income are disproportionately people of color, people with disabilities, veterans, and LGBTQ community members. Under disparate impact theory, federal courts have said that a landlord's intent may be irrelevant if the impact of a landlord's actions result in discrimination. In other words, if a landlord refuses to accept a voucher, they may be liable under federal law because that decision has a disparate impact on people of color, people with disabilities, and LGBT, especially trans people. In other words, this bill not only protects tenants, it protects landlords. I urge you to stand up for the most vulnerable in our community who bear the brunt of the current state of the law, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Heidel.
Mr. Chair will now move to commenters on Zoom. Our first speaker will be Kelly Sinier.
Good evening, counselors. My name is Kelly.
city is grateful for this opportunity, and we strongly support this measure to close this loophole and reduce barriers to stable housing for DV survivors. Thank you.
We'll go back to Alexandra Paisano. Are you there now?
Hello. So I'm with the Coalition to End Homelessness. I'm the Albuquerque Coordinated Entry Director. So I just also want to urge support for this ordinance. So currently, in our coordinated entry system, we have over 200 households that have housing vouchers right now. Some of them have been looking for housing for close to a year, since June of last year. It's taking on average well over 100 days for people to find housing right now, just because so many landlords and property managers refuse to accept housing vouchers, even though that they're guaranteed to get their rent every single month. Also, we have clients who don't have housing vouchers who are on limited income, such as disability. They also refuse to accept that as a source of income because it's not 2 to 3 times the rent they are asking for. This is extremely this ordinance be passed, because it is, extremely important to our people who are unsheltered at this time. Thank you.
Next speaker is Leah Armstrong.
Good afternoon, Chair and Councilors. Thanks for, sorry, I have weird shine on my eyes. Thanks for your time tonight. Mine are more questions. I support a deferral of this bill because I think more investigation needs to happen. Unfortunately, when you make a big statement in a Human Rights Act that's actually more far-reaching than federal acts, there's consequences that come with that. And I think it's a little big of Albuquerque to be better than federal law. I also would encourage getting the private sector and this sector together in order to try and figure out what maybe some case studies are where we could support this. But I think just putting discrimination in our human rights for source of income puts the private sector in a bit of a pinch. Their lenders require it on their mortgages. And I think there are solutions here, but I think it needs a little bit more work. So thank you.
Our next speaker is Lan Senna.
I recognize that background. Welcome back, Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the committee. It's so great to see you all in chambers and great to see staff there as well. Of course, my name is Lan Senna. I am now the Policy Director for the Center for Civic Policy, and I wanted to thank the sponsors, Councilor Bassan and Councilor Davis, for this important legislation. I think we've seen it, whether it's at council or whether you're a resident of Albuquerque, of how much affordable housing is on the pressing minds of so many of us. So if we look at the supply of affordable housing, and I know that's an issue that's important to so many of us, it has, of course, shrunk. And if you look at the numbers before the pandemic, numbers of renter households with extremely low income between 2012 and 16 was 22,300 renter households with extremely low income. That's 1 in 4 of our renters. If you look at those that are rent burdened, it's 9 in 10. Over 4,000 units could actually lose their subsidies by 2030. And again, that is before the pandemic. The ordinance will really help mitigate those that are really becoming more and more narrow as to those who qualify for housing. So I want to again thank the sponsors and really urge this committee in passing this. And I'm grateful for the deferral to allow for more community input. But this is a very pressing matter that many other cities are looking at, including Las Cruces and Santa Fe, as well as our state legislature. So again, I urge your support and thank you again to the sponsors.
Our next speaker is Alan Lasek.
Chairman and council members, thank you very much for your time this evening. My name is Alan Lasek, and I'm the Executive Director of the Apartment Association of New Mexico. The Apartment Association of New Mexico is a statewide organization. We've been around about 42 years. We represent 64,000 rental units and have about 750 members statewide. Here in Albuquerque, we represent about 245 apartment communities, 90 independent rental owners, and they combine for a total of 38,000 units. We're very thankful to be a part of this conversation this evening. We do have some concerns, though, that we would like to address with this bill. We believe there are many unintended consequences with this ordinance. There was a version of this bill that was rejected by the New Mexico State Legislature last year. The House Judiciary Committee found tons of legal issues with creating a new class of discrimination and the length of time it would take to litigate such accusations. This creates an entirely new class of discrimination that is not currently in federal law. Owners will be forced to take vouchers and virtually no longer income qualify residents. When Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program was created, Congress explicitly made the participation involuntary because of the regulatory burdens associated with the program. Most of the conversation with this bill has been around Section 8, but this is not limited to just Section 8 vouchers. Owners will now have to accept gifts, inheritance, and more as income. None of these are guaranteed recurring income. Housing vouchers also pose the possibility of inspections and other added qualifications. Many owners are just not able to operate under these circumstances, and especially small owners. Most large affordable housing management companies have entire compliance departments that are there just to ensure the regulations on both sides are met. I really want to stress that our opposition is really with the policy and not with the participants of these programs. We have many members that accept housing vouchers voluntarily and will continue to do so without new laws. I really look forward to continuing our conversation about rental housing in Albuquerque. And I do once again want to thank all of you for your time and consideration and having us be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rhiannon Samuel.
There we are. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rhiannon Samuel, and I am the Executive Director of NAOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association of New Mexico. We support this amendment being deferred as we look forward to conversations that aim to improve our overall housing inventory across the city and across all income levels. Along with our counterparts at the Apartment Association, we welcome the opportunity to give input on this amendment over the next month and to collaboratively work together to address both our housing shortage and our homelessness crisis. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Anita Cordova.
Good evening. I'm Anita Cordova. I am here representing Albuquerque Affordable Housing Coalition and the Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless. I've worked with the organization for 16 years. I am before you tonight to, one, thank City Councilors Bassan and Davis for introducing legislation that would finally eliminate source of income discrimination in the city of Albuquerque. Also here tonight to celebrate the growing acknowledgement the source of income discrimination protections make our city's human rights ordinance even stronger in protecting Burqueños. Affordable housing isn't in and of itself a racial justice issue. Source of income discrimination is a proxy for racial and socioeconomic discrimination, both of which are unacceptable to our city. The Albuquerque Journal's editorial board, New Mexico Voices for Children, the organizations I represent, and so many more are relieved to hear this attempt to interrupt the slide into homelessness for far too many individuals and families who rely on rental assistance to access secure and safe housing. The city of Albuquerque must adopt legislation that prohibits source of income discrimination. This would align us with 120 states and municipalities that have already passed these laws to protect prospective tenants, create housing stability for so many currently struggling, and actively reduce homelessness in our city. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment, and I know you'll do the right thing. I support this legislation.
Mr. Chair, that'll conclude public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Moya. Comments from councilors? Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have several questions, and I don't know if the other councilors want to start if they have any, but if not, I'm happy to dig in. It's probably going to require some response from several people, hopefully from in here. I have questions for Probably Rachel Biggs would be a good one to talk to, but then we also will have some city legal questions. And I think so here we go. I've heard so many conversations. I've been meeting with a variety of people from both sides of this situation and that sponsored this, the reason why I sponsored this legislation. And it seems to me like there's some kind of disconnect with what we're trying to do here. And I think that there's a way to find a middle ground. And I think that there's a way to work through some of the, somebody called it noise earlier. And I think that that's not trying to be a disrespectful way, but we're scared of doing something. And I think that we need to make sure to do it right, to where we find a middle ground. So I want to know, and I guess I'm going to have to defer to which one of you thinks that you can, or maybe both of you. How is this not an overreach of government? Because there's been a lot of people, and I guess I'm going to call Rachel so that we can sort of start with that. But there's people that are saying, with federal law, which then we'll go to city legal, and whoever else. I'll let you help with that, Mr. Chair. But, how is this not an overreach of government? How are we making sure that there is not us overstepping as a city to go to federal law and try to make things a little bit more minute than they need to be?
Ms. Biggs has
Okay.
backup, and
There we
and I know
go. We
Ms.
have
Keith
all
can
kinds of
jump in
people
here
that
with
can
us.
come in here and help us. Thank you. So let's start with that. Let's start with the kind of litigation part of this. How is this going to not create more of a litigious society that is going to now swing one way of discrimination to another way of discrimination towards the landlords?
I think that question would be better answered by city legal, but I do have some information
Yes.
on the federal efforts too I can follow up with.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Key, for your team, if you have some information. Yeah, go. Hey, welcome back.
Yeah, Ms. Jacobus is here, and I think she can address this better. Hello.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening. I'm not sure what time it is. Councilor Davis and Councilor Bassan, thank you so much for sponsoring this legislation, and other councilors, thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you today. You asked a really big question, so you may have to redirect me on a bit of it. But the first part, it's not a state or federal overreach. The city of Albuquerque has done a really great job historically in leading the way in policy and law around the country. Our city human rights ordinance added fair housing protections well before the state and the federal government did. I think we led by 10 and 20 years on those two accounts. So we don't have to wait for what the state or the feds do. Because there is no prohibition at either state or federal level at adding in source of income as a protected class. An additional example of where the city has led the way in the nation is last year with our Crown Act amendments. We were, I believe, the 13th city in the nation that added those protections for racial discrimination, and we did it before the state. The state followed us, followed our legislation almost word for word, and then we did it before the feds, who are talking about it right now. So we have free reign to do this. There's also value in municipalities leading the way in these conversations. We have small conversations throughout the state, and that tells the state what the community wants and needs. So again, this is an opportunity for Albuquerque to lead the way rather than be behind the conversation.
Councilor Bassan.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And Ms. Jacobus, thank you for being here. For those that are wondering who you are, you're with the Office of Civil Rights here in Albuquerque. So I think that that's, I hope that we're going to the right person with this. I believe that we are with answering a lot of this. People are concerned about getting sued. People are concerned about saying, okay, for all of these reasons in the legislation that you don't qualify, or in the federal and state housing legislation and everything, you don't qualify to be able to live here because you have bad credit, because you have some kind of criminal history, because of whatever is on that application process. People are afraid that if we put this in, that we're going to end up saying, okay, we're opening a door to say, okay, now the tenant is going to come back and end up saying, oh, well, you're just discriminating against me because I have a voucher. And it's like, well, no, there's ways to say it's not because of a voucher. It's because of maybe whatever the real other reasons are. So how do we put some of the landlords and the property managers at ease when it comes to making sure that they know that there is a way to decline a tenant for all the other reasons that they have in all of their in their own lease agreements and whatnot?
I'm going to answer that in two ways. First, HUD has already taken the position that landlords can be responsible for a discriminatory impact that their actions have, even though their intent was not discriminatory. So I share that because voucher holders tend to be overwhelmingly people of color, people with disabilities, people with children, elderly, and all of those are already protected classes. So right now in the city of Albuquerque, the state of New Mexico, and in our country, an attorney can bring a lawsuit alleging that a landlord, their actions in declining vouchers has a disparate impact on those populations. We don't see a lot of attorneys taking those cases because they're a bit challenging, and they're a bit challenging. That's the big way, the big why. And then the second reason is, so my office, I didn't introduce myself. I really apologize. I'm Tori Jacobus. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I run the Office of Civil Rights at the City of Albuquerque. And my office will be tasked with enforcing the revisions to the Human Rights Ordinance. My office is a neutral fact-finding agency, and our goal is not to litigate anything. Our goal is to work with, specifically in this matter, landlords and tenants and find a mutually agreeable solution that works for both parties. And as part of that, we would start with a massive education campaign to make sure that both landlords and tenants and all interested parties understand the limits of the law and policy. And then we work together with people on both sides to find reasonable solutions. I can say that my office, in the 3.5 years I've been here, we've not litigated anything because our goal is settlement and mutual agreement.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
How often can you give us some examples, and again, it might be back and forth. I'm sorry, I don't have my questions in the right order to keep them all directed at you, Mr. Jacobus or Ms. Biggs, but we need some examples of, some people were saying that there's housing, everybody that has a voucher can get housing. Everybody that this is available, and there's some people that are saying, we don't really think this is happening as often as it is. So I'm hearing, I guess what I'm trying to express is, I'm hearing from one side this dire need for assistance, and then I'm hearing from another side how there is lots of assistance that is being offered and not as much discrimination. So really, I'm looking for, how do we figure out a neutral way to get to the average, or to the center of really what the meat of what we have to talk about in order to move forward with this? Because I think that everybody I've been talking to is passionate one way or another. And so even though I don't think there's mistruths in it, I do think that adds to some of the convoluted essence of the conversation.
I'm going to allow Ms. Biggs to answer most of that, but I do want to address one part. Right now, we're talking mostly about vouchers, but there are other lawful forms of government assistance that play into this. And so a specific example that we've seen in the last 2 years is a lot of individuals received income or assistance from the state of New Mexico for COVID relief, COVID rental relief. And my office, although we could not help with those matters, we received quite a bit of phone calls from tenants who were being forced out because their landlords would not go through the process to accept the assistance from the government. Then I'll allow Ms. Biggs to talk specifics. Thank you.
And on that, Mr. Jacobus, if I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. On that, when we're talking about that, because that's another concern. So while we're kind of navigating through my confusion here, people are concerned about unemployment checks being a legal form of payment, or people are concerned about different gifts or inheritance, because oftentimes those aren't going to be a reoccurring type of payment. And so how do we put their mind at ease when it comes to that?
There is nothing in the ordinance that prohibits the landlord from setting a minimal income requirement. So, for example, with the gifts, the gift would be considered a portion of a minimal income, but it would still have to meet whatever that minimum is. What the ordinance says is that the landlord can't set a different minimum income requirement for voucher holders or other sources based on source of income.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Biggs, if you want to, can you help us with the other part of that question?
Thank you, Chair and councilors. I would just add, when we are doing our work, we work really well with the landlords that we work with. We house about 105 individual families a year with vouchers. And so we do have landlords that are accepting vouchers and really love the program because it is a reliable source of income. So I agree with you, Councilor Bassan, that there is a good way to talk about this, is that it's a way to leverage the dollars that are coming in from the city, the state, the federal government to ensure that our landlords are able to pay their mortgages and fix up their properties. And it leverages millions of dollars into our state every year to do that. With a voucher, you are always going to be guaranteed that you're going to get payment every month. So we've heard that in the comments already. And to the extent of the problem, we did a survey of about 176 landlords, and we only looked at landlords that have their rent set at fair market rent or below. So this is specific to the voucher discussion, not talking about the other public benefits and entitlements. And in that survey, we found that 35% of landlords we surveyed were interested in accepting vouchers or did accept them at the time. So there is quite a big amount of properties in the community that could take a voucher that are not right now. So it is an issue. It is a big issue. Our clients are on average taking 60 days. You heard from the coalition that it's sometimes upward of 120 days to find housing, and that's prolonging people's street homelessness, people living in encampments, and it's costing our city money the longer that we have people living out on the street every single day. So it would address barriers on both sides. And I'm interested and excited to hear about education programs and the great work that the Office of Civil Rights does to do this work and make sure that everyone knows what's out there and what's available for landlords, because I think it is a win-win for both sides.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And so, Ms. Biggs, you're totally not off the hook yet. Can you tell us, or do you know how often, how many vouchers we think are not being used right now because people cannot find somewhere to stay?
I know on average every month we have about 10 households that are currently searching. So we look at what our utilization for our vouchers, and this is just our small housing program that we have. I know the city of Albuquerque invests a lot of money in housing vouchers. I think it's around 1,200 to 1,500 vouchers a year that they're funding. So you could probably extrapolate that out. But from our program perspective, it's about 10 families a month that are currently waiting to find housing with a voucher that they've waited years for, and oftentimes.
And Mr. Chair and Ms. Biggs, there's you're one of what we discussed was about 6 different providers that do this, correct?
Yes, and the Department of Family and Community Services would be the best accurate account of all the voucher.
Okay. I think that it's important for us to learn and know, how many vouchers are out there that are not being utilized because people are saying they can't find somewhere. Because again, there's this separate dialogue happening. So how do we find answers for everybody to where we at least can sleep a little better at night? So that's a really terrible pun, sorry. When it comes to figuring out how to work through this. But where have other cities passed legislation like this before?
Yes, approximately 115 other cities have passed this legislation dating back to the 1970s. And now there are 20 states. And to Tori's point before, the effort to pass this at localities kind of compels the state to eventually pass that legislation and will compel the federal government. There have been efforts to pass this legislation at the federal level. HUD has done great in-depth surveys around this issue and fully supports not having this as a barrier at the federal level. So it's part of that progression of being able to do this here in New Mexico, and I'd love to see Albuquerque be the first city to do it.
Okay, thank you. I think that's pretty exciting. Mr. Chair, I still have some more, please. Thank you. So going back to the Family and Community Services, not necessarily for tonight, but if we can maybe have some information come down to us in the next 30 days or sooner than later, so to speak, of how many people we think we will be helping if we pass this, and how fast we will be able to help them, going back to how many vouchers we have out there that are not being used yet, and what that will do for our city. I think those statistics are going to be very beneficial. People think that this is going to be the potential for an endless lease, and I disagree with that. I think that maybe at this point, maybe Ms. Stiles, you can help with some of the clarification on that, and then I do have some questions about constitutionality later, just to put you on. I'm looking past you, Ms. Keefe, but to go ahead and talk about that as well. But I am curious, you know, I think the public needs to know where in this legislation it's preventing an endless lease from happening. So that way we can make sure that the landlords don't think that they can't evict if there's lack of payment, or if there's no payment, or if there's destruction. So I think that it's really important, and if you, Ms. Biggs, have a response for that from your experience, and then we can talk to our staff as well about it, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Bassan. And to your first question, the Coalition to End Homelessness does keep that data on how many vouchers and how long people are searching for housing, so we could probably get that data pretty quickly. And I know the Department of Family and Community Services would be happy to give that to you, I'm sure, too. But it is readily available. And from our program, we know on average 60 days is the length of time to find an apartment once you have a voucher. And on average, about 10 families a month are currently searching for a unit and haven't been able to find one. To your question about the endless lease, our landlord-tenant laws still apply in terms of a rental agreement. You're going to sign a housing assistance payment contract with the housing authority, or in our case, we have a contract that we would sign as our permanent supportive housing program. That is like a year lease. You have the same abilities to evict someone as you do someone outside of a lease, for non-payment of rent, for behavioral issues, for things that would void your contract essentially as the tenant in that lease situation. So there wouldn't be an endless lease in that case. And it does happen. We have clients that don't pay their rent and they do get evicted, and we work with them. The point of permanent supportive housing is that we have case management attached. So we're working really hard with our clients. They have an incentive to stay in the program and have their housing continue to be paid for. So they really want to work with their case manager and with their landlord to make sure that they're being good tenants. Our case managers work with our clients to make sure that both the landlord and the tenant are upholding their pieces of the agreement as well. And so that support is really essential. On average, our case managers are going out maybe once a week or once a month, depending on the client's needs, to provide that support to the client in our permanent supportive housing programs. But the lease is like any other one-year lease. After the year, it might go to a month-to-month, so our clients are dealing with the same eviction timelines and proceedings that you would deal with without a voucher.
Mr. Chair. And then after that 1 year is up, I think, and again, I know all of these answers because of our conversations, but I think the public that are viewing at home and that are here as well, this is really helpful, I hope. But after the 1 year lease is up, can a landlord change their rent?
Yes, and that is unfortunately happening a lot right now. What we're seeing are really exorbitant, really intense increases in rent, and there's nothing in this legislation that precludes a landlord from changing the rent after a year. They can't during the time of the lease, just like you can't when you sign a lease with your landlord for that year. But once the lease is up, a landlord could increase their rents. They can charge whatever the market will bear. This is not controlling rent.
Mr. Chair, and Ms. Biggs, can you also tell us a little bit about the inspection process? Is it something that only happens at the beginning of an applicant and landlord agreement, or is it something that happens periodically throughout the lease? And what is the timeline typically that those might take?
Good question. And again, I'll be speaking just from the perspective of healthcare for the homeless. We do have certified housing inspectors on staff. So about 3 of our staff are certified to do the housing inspections. They are done once a year. If there is an issue that the tenant raises that would require an inspection or some sort of check to see if things were up to a habitability standard, then we would do another inspection, but it's really only once a year. Once we go through the paperwork, we get the okay that the voucher is going to be accepted. We can usually schedule that inspection within 24 to 48 hours.
And Mr. Chair, Ms. Biggs, and typically how long does it take? I know, thank you for clarifying, this is for healthcare for the homeless only. You're not speaking for all of these different entities, but how long does it take for a landlord to receive payment once the lease and the contract are signed and the inspection has happened? Since you said an inspection maybe like 2 to 3 days, then how long can they expect before they get payment from you or from the tenant using the voucher from you?
Councilor Bazan, that's a great question. So once we finish the paperwork and the inspection, we can cut the check right away. As soon as all the paperwork is signed, the housing inspection is done, the contract is signed, and our tenant has been approved to move in, we can process that payment.
Thank you, Ms. Biggs. Mr. Chair, so Ms. Stiles, can you kind of speak to some of the other communications that you've heard from other different providers that provide with their timeline, and how that works, because again, I'm hearing 2 to 3 days for inspections and even just a few days for payment, all the way to 180 days, depending on who we're talking about, and the fact that a lot of landlords, if you have somebody that's coming in with a voucher, that's applying to live in this location, and they have a voucher, and now all of a sudden there's a lot of landlords that are saying their property is basically in a freeze from that moment until they end up either agreeing or inspecting or all of that. And so they're saying, well, now we have a unit that's off the market for 180 days, let's say, or 90 days even. And that's really hard for them to deal with when that's three months or so of rent that they could otherwise be getting.
Ms. Stiles, could you speak to that?
Sorry, I'm still figuring this out. Yeah, so the organizations that I reached out to and was able to hear back from generally had the same sorts of timelines as Healthcare for the Homeless, the longest being the Albuquerque Housing Authority. Out of the ones that I was able to get a hold of, we are going to do some more research during this deferment. But the Housing Authority said that it does vary because they have to get the inspection, which usually takes place about 5 to 7 days after the landlord or after the tenant chooses a unit. And it can vary after that because if they have to do a re-inspection because something in the inspection's not complete, they have to give the landlord time to fix the issue, and then they have to send somebody out to re-inspect again. They said generally it's very rare for them to ever issue payment for in more than 30 days after the tenant has decided that they would like to rent that unit, but more often than not, it happens within a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Biggs, do you have any experience with why a landlord might think that their unit is now going to be in what I'm calling a freeze for a couple months while they're waiting? I know that it sounds like Healthcare for the Homeless isn't part of that per se, but is there some way to navigate through this to where landlords don't have to worry so much about that?
Councilor Bassan, I'm glad that Abby had some information from the Albuquerque Housing Authority, because I believe they will be our best partner. What I have seen in this legislation across the country where it's worked very well is having the Housing Authority part of the discussions, and I think they'll be really important partners in this discussion, and I know they have been in the past. So just getting the information from the Housing Authority, because it's my sense that there are going to be a lot more Section 8 housing choice vouchers than there are the permanent supportive housing vouchers. So to get back to your question about how many people are we helping, having that number, and Abby might have it from the Housing Authority on how many Section 8 vouchers are issued throughout the community, and how long those inspections take will give us a better median, if you will, for how long inspections are going. And if there is a need to increase funding for more housing inspectors, to speed things up, we can maybe propose that as well. So that sounds like, as we'll have this deferment for 30 days, all of those options would be on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, I do agree with you on that. We probably need more inspectors. And Ms. Jacobus, did you want to?
Thank you, Councilor Bassan. Chair Davis, I'd like to add just a little bit to the inspection conversation. I don't have numbers and things like that like our other two presenters. Better?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. But what I do have is information from people who call my office. The goal of the inspection by the Housing Authority is to make sure that the people who are getting housing vouchers aren't in substandard housing. The ones that have the lengthy waits and have re-inspections, it's because there are considerable problems with their property where no human should be living in them. Some of the examples I have are holes in walls that go to the outside, mold, leaky air conditioning units that have caused mold or damage to ceilings and floors. Again, no one should be living in those units. And if an inspection helps correct that so that members of our community have reasonable and safe housing, that's what should happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobus. I have heard you mention these stories in our conversations. I think it's really important as well. And thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm almost done. I think that I do want to ask you a little bit more about the constitutionality of it. There's people that are saying it's unconstitutional to create this legislation because of private property rights, because of a multitude of reasons. But Can you speak to, again, I know we kind of touched on it at the beginning, but now specifically constitutionally, is it violating someone's rights if we were to create this discrimination verbiage inside this ordinance?
No.
Ms. Jacobus? Great, good answer.
City Legal's position is no, it does not violate the state or the U.S. Constitution. And this matter has been litigated in other jurisdictions and has been held to be constitutional.
Thank you so much. Okay, so my last is more of a follow-up. I think that just for our conversation as counselors and hearing about the stats that I'm hoping to get from whomever, if it's the Housing Authority or if it's Family and Community Service, I think it'd be great to get them from both and be able to compare. So I'm hoping to work on that. But I also, in part of the dialogue that we want to have, and I think in part of this deferral and what I'm looking for is two things totally separate. One of them is how do we help landlords if they have $140,000 worth of delinquent payments from vouchers, a multitude, not talking about a couple of people. These are the bigger apartments that they really are trying to do the right thing, but there are those partial payments happening, and some of them have said somewhere around $140,000 waiting and pending to get payment. What are we going to do really as a city, whether that's through incentives or some kind of program and I'm not a fan of incentivizing this per se, because I worry about the fine line of bribery or, somewhere along that, but some kind of way that we can kind of cushion the fall for landlords who are trying to do the right thing, but end up with people that can't pay that partial portion that they're responsible for. And when you multiply that by the number of tenants that they have that are getting this assistance because they're doing things in conjunction with one another, how do we advocate both ways is sort of what I would like to talk about in the next 30 days till our next meeting and hopefully at our next meeting. But in addition to that, I'm really hoping that we can get together. Counselor Davis, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I'm looking forward to getting together, and I would love for you to be there too, Ms. Jacobus, but to get some of the key players in the same room. And I don't know if this has ever been done before, and I'm really hoping we can all be civil about it. But at the same time, to get some of the key landlords, the key property managers, and then the key providers of vouchers. And I say that specifically because in one of the meetings we had today, somebody said, what's the provider that you're talking about? Because there's landlords and property managers that say that they're a provider of housing, but then you have people that are providers of services and vouchers. So I think that, everyone is a provider in this. How do we make sure that all the providers are protected while helping the person in need? And I would like us to be able to get in the same room and have some kind of meeting, or hopefully probably meetings, where we can figure out what amendments this may need so that we can make it work better for the majority of people. I'm not promising we're going to make it work for everyone, but for the majority of people. So thank you for answering these questions tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure I will have plenty more in the next 30 days.
And we have many more meetings to go. Thank you, Councilor Bassan. Really quickly, before I go to Councilor Lewis, Ms. Stiles, we pointed at you a couple of times and mentioned stats. I understand you have some data from our other providers that might give us a better sense going into our next conversations. Can you tell us a little about what you know about the number of persons utilizing service vouchers or waiting on housing with vouchers?
Yeah. So, sorry. From Albuquerque Housing Authority, I was told that right now they've got about 150 people that have active vouchers that are looking for units. So those are people that are living out of their cars or in motels or something else while they're looking for their unit, but they have the voucher ready to go. And then we heard from the Coalition to End Homelessness during public comment that they had 200 people. I'm unclear if those are overlapping or if there's 150 plus 200. And during the time that this deferral is happening, I will do some more research to see if we can get a little bit better numbers.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Mr. Chair, thanks. Just a couple questions and some comments, and maybe for Mrs. Stiles. Do we have some data on delinquency rates of those with voucher revenues and others? I mean, just comparison delinquency rates or amount of delinquency, or is there some data like that you have?
I do not have that data. I can work on that during the deferral, and we can check and see if any of the city legal or families and communities might have that information.
Okay. And, on the staff mentioned a survey that was done of tenants, and mentioned about 176 tenants, and about 65% said that they did not accept the vouchers. So I certainly would want to know why. It doesn't say why or why they would do that. So really interested in and it doesn't seem like they were secretive about it at all either, you know. And so, you know, what would be some of the reasons, you know, why a tenant would reject, you know, vouchers as sources of revenue. And so I do think we need to hear from a good amount of tenants in our city, and certainly from a lot of the people that were surveyed there. And also, Councilor Bassan, you asked some questions about a lot of those are some legal questions and constitutional questions. I'm assuming this proposal came from the administration and from the department. And I certainly appreciate the perspective of the department and the advocacy that they're doing, you know, for this. And but I do think some of those questions would be great posed to some of the attorneys in maybe the city attorney's office that might be faced with litigation with some exposure that the city might have if we were to enact an ordinance like this in that way. And again, if we're an advocacy group or a legal advocacy with our department that's advocating for this, certainly we're going to get a different perspective from somebody who might have to defend, you know, litigation, you know, with the city, and or maybe not, because if the city's taken the position of advocating for this issue, we're just going to be on that side of the issue, and we may be exposed to some things that we may haven't. So I think we should pose those questions, and I do appreciate the sponsors for, I think, deferring this, because I also think we need to hear from, you know, the state legislature, our own state legislature, and some of the legal ramifications that they obviously struggled with when they dealt with this. And but again, Councilor Bassan, you asked questions about conflicts with the federal laws and the state laws, and I think those would be good posts for from another attorney perspective and some of the exposure that we might have in that regard. And then another, you know, thought might be, if that is the case, we've talked a lot about the benefits of a tenant having a you know, of a landlord having a tenant with vouchers, and there's been a lot of talk about all the benefits and that it would be to a tenant. And if that is the case, it sounds like we haven't made that case really to the tenants, and maybe that's where maybe that would be the better next step in this regard. Is there's some money to a study or to educating. It might be on educating our landlords in our city the advantages of that they can have and the benefits of being able to, you know, take tenants with vouchers.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. That's a great point, and I want to end on that one as well, and just highlight that we've had a lot of discussion about the front end of this process, but as Councilor Bassan and Councilor Lewis mentioned, there is an allocation of funding in the bill to develop a landlord, what we're calling an incentive program at the moment, and it addresses some of the things like Ms. Kuhn brought up about, we've already heard from our meetings, Councilor Bassan and I with folks from the Apartment Association and others, about how to help landlords navigate their side of the paperwork process. If they're preparing to bring a unit or multiple units on the market, this mostly applies to large or mid-size multiple providers, how can they prepare their unit ahead of time? How can they get an inspection ahead of time to feel confident that they'll not have an issue or have someone ask questions? How can they prepare their own application process to mirror the one of the qualifications? All of those things are definitely within our scope of ability to do. That would sort of level the playing field when it comes to everybody sitting at the table to look at a property and make it available, and so that it's not fair for us to just only work on one side of that ledger, to just qualify renters and not qualify housing stock. And I think we're trying to work through that, and I appreciate, Ms. Stiles, in particular, your work. The notes that I had there, and I hope that we can continue to have this conversation. I hope if we would get some more data on the inspection loads and what the delay at the housing authority is. 5 to 7 days sounds pretty good for government work, but it's not very good in a housing market like this, and I wonder what we're missing. And is that something the administration can work with us on to fund extra inspectors there, or Family and Communities version for our funded vouchers? I don't know what that looks like, but certainly something we have 30 days to work on. And also I wonder, and I have not seen it yet, but I wonder if we can get a copy of the inspection list. I had a landlord reach out and ask if, hey, what does that mean? I think it is a little scary to think the government might come into your property and look at that, but I think it's easier than they think it is, and so being able to share that in public would be super helpful. And then I want to ask the administration quickly, and I'm conscious of our time because we have some other bills that are going to take a minute. But Mr. Padilla, you've been awful quiet. I want to be sure the administration has a chance to weigh in before we defer, so we can be sure we bring everybody's answers back to the table in 30 days.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, I've been taking notes so that we can actually reach out to the different departments to get the answers. We are supportive of the legislation, and we'll do what's necessary to help get it passed.
Thank you, Mr. Padilla. And Councilor Lewis, to answer to address one of your questions, this one actually didn't come from the administration. It actually came from the Homeless Coordinating Council. We asked at the end of last year if the advocates and providers could do one thing in the city to switch the gears and change the game. And this was unanimously the one thing, which was we have people who have vouchers who are qualified, we need housing, and we have landlords who don't know how to take them. If we could figure this out, it would be the biggest dynamic game changer in the city's math. And so it came from the advocates, it came from the community, which includes our staff. And thanks. It's not that it would be bad if it came from the administration, but this one kind of came from the ground up. And that's why Councilor Bassan and I gave it a shot to work on it from the beginning, and hopefully we can answer that. So thank you all. If there's other questions, conversations from other councilors, then we will get to your bills. The motion on the floor is for a 30-day deferral or until our next FGO meeting, which is about 30 days. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you all. Thank you, Councilor Bassan, for all the work on that so far. And we'll be back. And Mr. Kobus and others, thank you so much. Councilors, next up, Councilor Pena, I think you have the next two items, so let's just give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have Director Sanchez here, and I'll let her go ahead. So R9 is directing the Department of Arts and Culture to create a program to offer reduced rate biopark and museum tickets to low-income New Mexico residents. So I'll let
And you have a due pass, is that right?
oh yes, I'd like to move a due pass.
And a second from Councilor Feeblecorn? I'm sorry. Director, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So Director, tell us all about it.
Oh, Talis. Thank you, Councilor Davis, Councilor Pena. So this is actually coming out of one of last year's council objectives to recommend approaches for making the biopark specifically more affordable for low-income members of our community. So we did present to the council earlier this year several approaches, and then Councilor Pena came back with this resolution to go ahead and pursue our first recommendation, which is essentially to create an admission fee that's lower for individuals in our community who have already qualified for SNAP benefits. So if you're SNAP benefit eligible and you have your card from the state of New Mexico, then you would be able to get into the biopark and the two Albuquerque operated museums at a reduced rate.
Thank you, Director. Councilor?
Thank you. You know, it's just taken some time. We did a study, we looked at it, we came up with some options. I just want to thank you, Director. I really appreciate all your work that you put into this. I think this is going to be very meaningful for community members, and I know there was some questions about whether it was going to be financially a hit to any of these the zoo or any of the museums, and actually I think it's just going to be wonderful, and I think it's going to be people who haven't necessarily participated or went to the museum or to the biopark, and so I hope to see that we have some revenue coming out of this. So thank you, Director. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other councilors, questions or comments? Councilor Bassan, and then we'll come back to Councilor Pena to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple questions. One, since we're in budget time, one of the questions that came up was if we were to offer reduced rates to get in, are there going to be reduced rates on the tram that navigates between the biopark and the zoo?
Councilor Davis, Councilor Bassan, there actually would be, because when you use the tram, it's the same kind of structure that we already have. It's a combo pass that allows you to get onto the train and go between the facilities. And so there would be a reduced rate for the combo pass as well, which would give you access then to the tram.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Director. See, you can check that off your list for this week. Just teasing.
Oh, really?
No, just teasing. So the other thing that I want to say, because I would be remiss if I didn't do a plug for this, is that with incoming patrons, I absolutely hope we continue to work together to reduce excessive speeding in front of the biopark, so that way we can get some trees up, we can get some maybe mobile speed enforcement so that we don't have any tragedies happen ever again, obviously for many reasons, but I just, with an increase in participation from some of our most vulnerable, including the youth, I really am hoping that the biopark and arts and culture will do their part to help slow people down, because Councillor Benton keeps talking about the trees and how that helps slow things down scientifically, and I'm finally starting to get on board with it. So just, I had to give that a plug.
Councillor Davis, Councillor Bassan, if I may. Yes, we do have a plan. We've been working with Councillor Benton over the past few months specifically. He put money aside for that. We have a plan that we are about ready to go ahead and move forward with our landscape architects. So yeah, that's real.
Thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Mr. Chair, do we have are the rates worked out yet? The levels of rates or the reductions, has that been ironed out?
Correct.
Councillor Davis, Councillor Lewis. So this resolution would essentially tell us to go ahead, come up with an implementation plan, but the actual rates, because they are admission fees, would have to come back separately for approval by council.
So we would technically this resolution would pass and we wouldn't have those yet. You'd come back later with that, or we'd. Okay.
It would have to be an amendment to our rate ordinance, is that right? It covers everything from the biopark to swimming pools, right?
Yes, Councillor Davis, that's correct.
Mr. Chair.
So
let Councilor Lewis finish.
Would our rate ordinance set limits on the rates that we could reduce it by, or what does that do?
Director
Councillor
or Mr.
Davis, Councilor Lewis, not to my knowledge. It's just that any changes in rates, increases or decreases for any of, at least for in arts and culture, for any of our admission-based institutions have to come in front of the council for approval.
So you'd come, if we pass this, you'd come back to the council with those specific rates for approval.
Councillor Davis, Councilor Lewis, that's correct. You would have that specifically to discuss.
So what, Mr. Chair, I guess I don't understand why we need this resolution then. Why wouldn't we just, somebody wants to answer that.
Councilor Lewis wants Councilor Bassan to answer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is directing the department to come up with a program. So this is literally telling the department to go ahead and come up with the program and the rates and the plan and how this will look and work and operate. And then once they have the plan, they come back to us. But instead of, I believe, doing this on their own, because it will take money and time, Councilor Pena is also working with them as a direction for that. And Councilor Pena, please correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right on it.
Councilor Lewis, other questions?
Just if the sponsor would agree to moving this without rec, I would support moving it without rec to the full council, because I think it just deserved a good. I don't want to defer it. I don't think it should be deferred, but let's move it to the full council, and I'd support it without rec to get it to that point. And I don't know if I'd vote for it or not, but I definitely would move it to the new full council without rec.
I'm amenable. I think it's, I would just stick, I would stick to the do pass if it doesn't, yeah. I would stick to the do pass. I think we've just been working on it for a long time. I'm tired. I was up all night last night, so lots of things going on. But we actually did a study to determine if this was something that was feasible, what it would look like. We came up with a bunch of different options in terms of how we could implement it, So this is precisely what Councillor Bassan is saying, is now it's directing the department to come up with that plan to implement it. As the results from the study that was done was really showing that we really don't have a lot of people who are accessing it now. So this could potentially be a revenue generator for the parks and the museum. So I just think that it's just taken so long, and I would just hope that we could pass it as is with the director coming in. Whether I don't foresee it being completely free, but I think there has to be some dollars to be made. So I think this is a process that's going to happen. I don't think that the reduction is going to have an impact necessarily on the budget, because as I mentioned, it shows that these are families who have not necessarily been accessing the park and the museums. So.
Mr. Chair, I'm not going to reject it here, but I do think, this is because it has to do with, I think there's some things that are unknown, and this is a process that certainly the full council, I think, will, obviously that's the next step to weigh in on. I'm not going to reject it here.
Thanks. And I might direct counselors who want to know, this was a process that was begun last year under the old council with a study that has a lot of that detail on what the options would be. And this is sort of that follow-up that says, okay, we agree there's something to be done here. Go tell us what it is. So, yeah, I would just rather do a motion for a due pass and send it to council, but we can have that. The motion on the floor is for a due pass. So, Counselor, anything else for a close?
I urge your support.
Counselors, other questions?
Since you asked, Mr. Chair, you said other questions. I did. When there was a time when we were raising fees, and I voted against raising fees to the biopark because I didn't believe in that. I think that we needed to keep them, at an affordable rate. And so, I'm not necessarily opposed to this. I think, but we need. I do think we need to apply this to the concept and the ideas to a lot. I think when we look at our bus and our transport, and we made it all free, And so I do believe that there is a good discussion that we could have with some just equity across the board on these kinds of fees and what they do and the advantage that they could have. So anyways, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Well, the motion on the floor is for a due pass. If that fails, we can recommend a new motion. Counselors, any other discussion on that motion? All those in favor of the due pass say yes. Raise your hand. Yes. Oh, that passes unanimously. So we will move on. Counselor Pena, you're also up on R10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R10 is directing the city to develop an enhanced recycling program, creating a plastic bag task force, calling for a monthly solid waste management recycling report, and expanding the litter removal services. And we have Director Whalen here.
Director, you're on deck. Counselor, is that a motion for a due pass?
Yes.
And Counselor Bassan, that's a second? Sorry. Counselor Pena, back to you.
So as he's working his way up here, the resolution calls for the development of an enhanced recycling plan that would expand the city's recycling program. The plan would include more robust recycling, the goal of 36,000 residential curbside tons to be recycled by 2025, expanding commercial, enhancing community outreach, evaluating costs, and exploring the possibility of the city establishing and operating its own recycling facility. So I've been working with the director on this. I know he has his own plans in place in terms of what he's been doing, as you all know, with the repeal of the plastic bag ordinance. He's been working on lots of recycling efforts, and I know that this expansion of, what percentage was it? I'm sorry. I think expanding the commercial by 5% and the residential is something that you've been looking at. So if you want to just give a brief update on that, and then I can just talk a little bit about my notes.
All right, Council Chair and Council Pena, thank you. Yeah, part of the resolution is to get us to a residential goal of 36,000 tons annually. So that's what our goal would be, and then to increase our commercial recycling program by about 5%. Currently, our commercial recycling program is an opt-in program, whereas our residential recycling, if you have a residence and you're a resident of the city of Albuquerque, you get your black refuse can, and then you also get your blue recycling container. So that's where we are with that. As far as coming up with a program for the evaluation of our own MRF or the study, we do have our study that was done, that was set forth by the council last year in our fiscal 21 goals, and the study has been completed. They presented it to council, I think, last November or October. The study is it's right at 10 months old, so I still think the information in the study is still very pertinent, very reliable, and so I think revisiting what was said in the study would be a good step to move forward with recycling for the city of Albuquerque.
Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and the study that was conducted, this is when we had the recycler that was currently here. The recycler has now left, so we really have to look at what we do moving forward, whether there's an extended contract to the new person who's in, or whether we go back out and look to see what that looks like. When we were talking about the bags, I just wanted to say, and I want to commend the director before I say this. I know he's been working really hard to address these concerns moving forward. Friedman was here prior to this director being there, and I know I just had some concerns in our ability to recycle in the amounts of recycling. So annually, the trash collected is 170 tons. We recycle about 41,000 tons, with 64% of it with a 64% with a contamination rate of about 36%, which totals only about 26,000 tons, which are recycled. And, you know, the level of just talking about, you know, how much emissions and everything that were used to actually pick up from 180,000 homes every single day. Each truck holds about 9 tons, so that's about 2,900 trucks worth of recycling, yet we pick up about 180,000 from about 180,000 homes per day. That's 65,700 yearly. So, you know, just looking at that, I mean, we have a long ways to go in terms of recycling and education and what we recycle. And the idea of a MRF is, as you know, the city used to operate its own MRF, and obviously it didn't have the capacity to do what we need, so we partnered with a private firm in order to do the recycling. So hopefully this private firm, the new private firm that comes in, is able to help with the capacity. If not, this bill doesn't pose that we actually do our own MRF, but look at the possibility if we don't have a robust plan with the current recycler moving into the future.
Council Chair, Council Chair, and Councilor Pena, yeah, I think revisiting the study that was done is necessary, because it was a study that was done in recommendations. They had several recommendations, and one of the recommendations that they kind of afforded to us, or pushed, says this is probably your best option at the time, was to work with the previous company that was running the MRF, and to look at getting extensions, because their contract is up in about 15, 16 months, and there are 2-3-year extensions that were possible. So when the previous owner was there, we had recommended doing both extensions, but requiring that they invest $5 million into the facility for newer optical sorters, because that MRF is about 12 years old, and there's a lot newer technology to help with the contamination rate. So those were things that were on the table, but I think now with the new company that's running it, they're one of the top 3 size-wise in Northern America. So we're not dealing with just a local regional hauler like we were before. We are now dealing with one of the major players in the solid waste industry. They're one of the top 3, and it goes back and forth between them, Waste Management and Republic, just depending on who's buying what companies. And they've made a significant investment in the Southwest. They've acquired several haulers in Las Cruces. They've acquired several haulers here. They've acquired the Friedman plant that was here. They acquired the Friedman plant that was in El Paso. So they're making a significant footprint here in this area. And I think when it comes to recycling, it is good to try and go with somebody who is an expert in the business, as opposed to somebody who may be smaller and regional, because the recycling industry is very up and down. You know, it's very, especially since 2018, it's good to have some people that are very reliable that could do a major investment. And I think now that we have them in the game, we have spoken to other companies, and there is an interest for maybe another person coming and building another MRF. So I think our options are, we have more options now based on the study and based on the current things that have happened in the recycling industry in Albuquerque. And one of the things is when it comes to recycling and refuse and garbage, it's, you know, not everything can be recycled. You just have to come up to that understanding that there is trash. And so that's one of the educational things that we really push. We push a lot recycling, but we've really started pushing a lot of reuse and reduce, because we do have to reduce the amount of refuse that we do, because not everything is recyclable, and working to get our contamination rate down is something that we're more than willing to do.
Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, so, you know, this is something that I've always kind of been passionate about in terms of our recycling efforts here at the city. As you know, I was working on this when I was actually part of a community group that I used to belong to. But, you know, when we really look at the numbers and see that we're picking up 65,700 truckloads every year, and to total the amount of truckloads for the 26,000 that actually does get recycled is about 2,900 trucks. That's when they're at their full capacity. So, you know, that's a lot, right? When we're going to 180,000 homes every single day, picking up their trash, and then, you know, just so I guess it's weekly, I should say, but you know, I think we can do a better job. So with that, I would urge your support.
I do have one more comment, Councilor.
Director Whalen.
The only question I do have about this amendment, and since we are at FIGO, the Finance Committee, it's the section section 4, where we shall add 6 full-time employee positions. I guess since we are in the budget season and going through that, we're a rate-based enterprise fund, so we're not part of the general fund, so we're not funded by gross receipts tax. We are funded by our rate. Our current rate is $17, and we're at capacity within that rate as far as everything that we do and what our programs do. So my only question is, if this passes and we have to pull 6 full-time employees, if we don't have a funding source for that, we're going to have to pull it from another program within our department.
Councilor Pena?
Mr. Chair, I was actually going to move a motion with no rec to full council. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and Director, to address that question, I think it would be good before we get to council, let's figure out how to merge all this with budget and answer those questions, right? Because if we're going to create new positions, we got to figure that out as well. So thanks. The motion on the floor. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Feeblecorn.
I just had a couple questions before this gets to main council. One, Director Whelan, can you give some more information on how you would get commercial recycling up to 5%, what that would look like?
Council Chair and Council Feeblecorn, it's not get it up to 5%, it's increase our current program by 5%.
What is it at
now?
now?
I don't have the actual number of what we're at, because our commercial clients, they can either use another hauler. They have the freedom to choose what hauler they use. So one of the things we started as a pilot program is we reach out to every one of our commercial clients and offer them recycling. We give them the first 90 days free to see if they like it and if it's something they want to continue to do, and then they continue to do it. So I think we're right at about 11,000 commercial clients right now. It's gone down over the last years because of the pandemic and businesses that were closing. But I can get you a number of exactly how many commercial clients participate in our recycling program. So for instance, and I'm just going to give an example, if that number was 1,000, we would want to raise that 1,000 by 5% to try and get it up to a higher number. But we're always trying to get more commercial recycling out there from our commercial clients.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I guess I'm just asking how would we raise that? Would it be just direct outreach to commercial businesses? Would we consider an opt-in where you have to opt out? How would you approach it?
Council Chair and Council Feeblecorn, well, right now, like I said, we do have people who call our businesses regularly and offer the program to them. Part of it has to do with location and if they're able to house a container for recycling, because if you look at a lot of our businesses, when they're built, they usually have that enclosure. And if they weren't built with the possibility of having double enclosure or anything like that, it might be hard for us to put a container at that location, because you have to take it into consideration, the turning radius, the truck radius, how it would be able to get in there. So we do work with businesses, and we're always doing outreach trying to increase that number. As part of our program, that's probably one of the things we'll do. We currently do a lot of outreach for residential, and we're starting to do more outreach for commercial. We're getting ready to do something in August that's going to affect every counselor, and it's going to affect every resident in the city of Albuquerque. We're going to be changing days, and it's never been done here before, to facilitate our east side west side split. During that, we will be touching every household, and we're not just going to be telling them about their new day. We're also going to be incorporating, as part of this plan, outreach when it comes to recycling, putting things in people's hands, and that will include commercial businesses as well.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, one more question. Just something that's missing from this legislation that I think we could think about is, the city does not have recycling available downtown at city facilities. And I'd like to see if we could include increasing the availability of recycling and potentially adding composting to city facilities, city festivals, and particularly city venues.
Council Chair and Council Feeblecorn, are you saying the city facilities here don't have recycling?
I'm saying that the last time I was at the chemo, although it was pre-COVID, I tried to recycle something and there was no recycling bin. And I've been at several other city-owned facilities that did not have recycling bins available.
Council Chair and Council Fiebelkorn, that shouldn't be. We went through during the beginning of the pandemic and made sure every city facility was given recycling bins. So that was a program we did very early when everything was shut down. So I will look into that, but every city facility should have, just like on the floor, if you go to every floor, at the end of the floor, you'll either see the big 96-gallon cans or the little oval ones. We probably bought over 5,000 3 years ago, and then, you know, during the pandemic, things were closed down, but we did distribute them. So if there's a city facility without recycling, I'd love to know, because then we'll look into why, because they should have their containers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My example was pre-COVID. I have not been to those facilities since.
Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Just a second, Councilor Bassan, then Councilor Lewis.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And Councilor Fiebelkorn and Director, I think that one way that I can envision an easy way to increase recycling is truly through the education process. And I know I've said this in previous meetings over the last few months, but so many people do not know to not use a waste bag for their recycle. It's an automatic goes to the landfill. We've heard you talk about it multiple times. So to me, to be able to educate, sure, what can be recycled, but at the very least, not lumping it all together, because there's, I mean, people that put the, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm gonna do this, the paper grocery bags in the recycle bag, and then they put it in a recycle bin. And so those paper bags are now not going to be recycled when they otherwise would have if they were just directly put in the bin. So I think that educating businesses and residences alike on something, just that one detail, might significantly increase what we can actually recycle and versus what is contaminated and gets put straight back into the landfill.
Great, thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Mr. Chair, as far as staffing, Jess, if you could, what would be the cost of 6 FTEs, and does that have to come from this department? Would it have to be taken from this department, or could be funded from another source, revenue source?
I think that's a director answer.
Or Mr.
Council
Whalen.
Chair and Councilor Lewis, the cost for 6 full-time employees with benefits that would be housed would be about $326,000 annually recurring.
Is that, I'm assuming that's not in the proposed budget from the mayor?
It's not in this year's proposed budget.
And then, and that has to come from within your department? You'd have to reduce your department expenses?
Without an additional funding source, we would have to, we would have
source.
to look in other areas of our department to cover that cost.
Right, okay.
Thanks. Councilors, other questions? Mr. Munoz, anything else?
I was just going to comment that I believe we would probably have to do some sort of general fund transfer into solid waste, if I'm not mistaken, to fund that in terms of the funding source that he speaks of. So,
thanks. Councilors, other questions? Seeing none, Councilor Pena to close again.
I urge your support for no rec.
Did we change the motion, or we're taking it as the sponsor's motion since it was hers originally? Okay, thank you. Councilors, all those in favor of no rec, raise your hand and say yes.
Yes.
That passes unanimously. Thank you. Councilor Lewis, R11.
Mr. President, R11 is second update to attachment R2047, appropriating transportation infrastructure tax funds to expand the scope of the Paseo del Norte project. And Mr. Chair, this is it's in order to be able to just take advantage of an additional funding source. This is just changing some language to expand the scope to include a section of Unser Boulevard in between Paseo and Paradise, I believe. And so it's again just changing the language to increase the scope to include that section to be able to take advantage of some of this of a different funding structure. I urge your support. Move to pass.
And I'll make a second. And Councilor Lewis, can you just clarify for me? This doesn't add any additional funding from the infrastructure tax. It just expands the scope to allow the use of extra funding.
It creates the opportunity for us to use the infrastructure tax potentially for a section along the roadway that it could be used for by doing this.
But and I'm sorry, it's just my I did not do my homework to read this bill. But does it allocate new funding at this point, or it just says
it does not?
It would have to come back to this council for allocation.
That's right.
If appropriate. Okay, cool. Thanks. Councilors, other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say yes. Raise your hand. That's 5-0. Ms. Enos? All right. Councilor Feeblecorn for Councilor Benton. You have R12 for us.
Yes, Mr. Chair. It's R12, amending the adopted capital implementation program of the City of Albuquerque by supplementing current appropriations for new federal funds received through the New Mexico Department of Transportation. I'll move a do pass.
And a second from Councilor Bassan. Councilors, any questions for this or anything from the administration? I see Mr. Montoya here, but nothing to say. Great. Any questions? Mr. Padilla, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, we're just requesting immediate action on this if it passes.
In just a second. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that if we can hear from Director, that'd be great, just so that way the public also can understand exactly what we're talking about with this appropriation.
Great. Director Simon, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilor Bassan, the measure before you will help us initiate construction on an exciting new trail project in the North Valley. We call it the 2nd Street Alameda Trail. We've been working on this project for about 3 years. Like a lot of things during the last couple of years, the price has slightly escalated. However, we were quite lucky and nimble to take advantage of some state DOT funds that were not being put to productive use. So we sort of vacuumed those up, and this will help us close the funding gap for this project. The project has been bid already. The contractor has been selected. We cannot issue a notice to proceed to the contractor until these funds are literally moved into the project and you accept them on behalf of the city. So we're quite anxious to have the bill pass council because we're literally waiting to get this contractor to work. And with that, I'll try to answer any other questions you might have.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Director. Boy, we get in our own way so much with bureaucracy. Thank you for that. And I'm a big fan of grant money, and who isn't? I don't know if Mr. Menacucci has something to add or if I see him on Zoom. So I just want to give him the opportunity as well from staff and endpoint to speak if there's something to add.
Mr. Menacucci, if you can hear us.
Yes, Mr. Chairman Davis, Councilor Bassan, no, nothing else to add. Director Simon explained the situation as it is.
Well, that was easy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would hate for us to not proceed with this so that prices can rise yet again.
Thank you, councilors. Councilors, any other questions? Seeing none, Councilor Feeblecorn to close for Councilor Benton.
Urge your support.
Councilors, all those in favor, raise your hand and say yes. Yes. That matters carries unanimously. I'll make a motion for immediate action. If I have a second, I have several seconds. Councilor Bassan, I guess we'll pick. Councilors, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of immediate action say yes. That matter carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the committee. This is extremely helpful to us, and we look forward to showing you the project.
Councilor Feeblecorn, stop signs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, this is R13, directing the administration to install 3-way stop signs at the intersection of Cutler Avenue Northeast and Morningside Drive Northeast. I'll move a do pass.
Also, and a second from Councilor Bassan.
And,
I see we have Director Montoya, and we have Ms. Dolan.
That's all I was going to say is we have Ms. Dolan here to answer any specific questions.
You beat me to it. Great. Councilors, any questions? Councilor Feeblecorn, any comments? And I see the administration is raising their finger, so that must mean they want to say something.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like Pat to actually come up, Director Montoya to come up and actually talk about this. I think he's had some conversations with people in his department, and we have some information that Councilor Feeblecorn might want to know about.
Councilor, is that okay with you?
Sure.
Director Montoya.
So, Mr. Chairman and Councilor Feeblecorn, so as you know, the study was conducted last year, about a year and a half ago, at that intersection. We did take a look at it and determined at that point in time that the intersection was not in need of a 3-way stop. Of course, that was done during COVID when the traffic patterns were much lower than they are now. However, we are prepared to install both of the stop signs. What that will entail from our end is to first notify the public with advance warning that both signs will be installed. We will have a mobile trailer that will be installed as well that will notify individuals at that intersection. So it'll be about 2.5 to 3 weeks before we can actually install that. So I guess I'm saying the legislation may not be needed. We can proceed on our own if you'd like, or we can go ahead and take the legislation all the way through, but we are prepared to install both of those signs.
Councilor Feeble-Corn.
Mr. Chair, until the stop sign is installed, I'd like to continue on this path. This was an important study that was really important to folks in my district. It came back as recommending a crosswalk that was removed from this area. This is a really important three-way stop that's right by a school. There's lots of foot traffic. It's a very dangerous place, and it's only getting worse as there's more and more traffic in the area, and it's really a developing part of town. And so I really appreciate your willingness to move forward with it. I wish I had known that before this, but I'd like to have a direct, like a specific timeline available for when it would be completed or to move forward with the resolution.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman and Councilor, we can have that information for you as early as tomorrow afternoon.
A direct, specific timeline?
Correct.
Okay.
The signs are in-house. It's just a matter of preparing the crew that will install those and the advanced warning for the motorists. So, but I can have that for you tomorrow.
Thank you. Well, in that case, Mr. Chair, if I get that by tomorrow, I'm happy to not do a due pass on this bill and leave it here.
And Councilor, I'm going to go to Councilor Lewis as a question, but it'll be your motion whether you want to do pass here and then you could script for withdrawal at the next meeting, or we could defer it here for another 30 days to see if you get that, and you could do that withdrawal then. Councilor Lewis.
Mr. Chair, thanks. So the study a year ago didn't warrant it. Are you going to do a new study to look at the changes or to substantiate actually putting
Mr. Chairman and Councilor Lewis, the answer is no, we will not do an additional study. They're expensive to do. And I would imagine that if we were to do another one, we would probably have the same numbers that would come up, or at least maybe a little bit higher, but probably not enough to actually warrant the stop sign. But unless the councilor directs us to do another study, we would not.
Is that the normal process that you would go through before installing stop signs, that you would have a study that would support it?
Corrected, Mr. Chairman and Councilor Lewis. So when we look at all of the major intersections, if we're going to install traffic signals or street lights or stop signs or stop bars, any of those sort of things, we can look at just certain patterns. We use our traffic counts, any of those sort of things. But if it's a major improvement or an improvement to an intersection, a lot of times, most studies are generated by the councilors. However, the department does generate some of their own. So when a councilor approaches us and says, we would like this intersection studied, or we would like this stretch of roadways looked at, we usually come back to you for the specifics, the parameters that we're looking at. And then at that point, we would go ahead and use one of our on-call contractors to carry that out.
So you said that if you did a study, you'd think that it would be about the same, that didn't warrant it the last time a year ago? You think it'd be about the same result?
Mr. Chairman and Councilor Lewis, we believe that the numbers would increase a bit. We just don't know what those numbers would look like. And again, I go back to the fact that the study was done at the request of Councilor Gibson, and that was done about a year and a half ago at the peak of COVID. So, of course, schools were closed, traffic patterns were down. So we're not quite sure that we got the most accurate count that we could have gotten. But at this point, we determined that it probably is not going to increase that much. And that comes from our city engineer.
Mr. Chair, and don't those studies protect us, protect the city, protect the department against potentially being able to, something that could happen? Obviously, these intersections are dangerous many times with stop signs, without stop signs, but usually we use studies to be able to protect us for future lawsuits and things like that, correct?
Mr. Chairman and Councilor Lewis, you're absolutely correct. In most cases, when we've had lawsuits filed against the city, one of the things that attorneys look at for the defendant is whether or not they just look at a lot of things, but one of the things that they look at is whether or not we were justified in installing any type of equipment that would either slow down traffic or move traffic in a different direction. But that's one of the things that they do look at.
Right. And Mr. Chair, that's just a little concerning. Just that conversation. I'm typically on things like this, if the counselor recommends this and it's in your own district, I wouldn't disagree with you on that. But I do think that that's a concerning discussion there that I would think that we'd want to certainly take into account and possibly even fund a study on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that there was enough information in that study to say that there needed to be traffic calming in this area, and it came back with a lighted, flashing crosswalk about half a block away. And when we presented that to the folks in the community, which has been an active public process, they said, geez, kids aren't going to go from the school down a block and a half, cross over, and then come back. And so the community really wanted this three-way stop. But again, it was warranted in the study that there needed to be some sort of crossing in this general area. And I just wanted to give Ms. Dolan a chance. She's been on this project since the beginning. I have not. And so I just wanted to give her an opportunity to give us a little overview of kind of the background on how this was developed and why we're moving forward with this.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Councilor Feeblecorn, Councilor Lewis. There's actually been a couple of studies. The first one was the Cutler Avenue study, which Council did adopt as policy moving forward for the development of Cutler Avenue, with a focus on traffic calming, pedestrian safety and improvements, improved bicycle facilities, lighting, placemaking, and economic development. As you explained, Councilor Feeblecorn, when the progress plans were presented to the stakeholders in that area, and that includes businesses, property owners, the 21st Century Academy, which is a charter school serving students grades 1 through 8, and the Cachette dance there in that vicinity. They, as you said, expressed concern at the proposal for a rapid flashing beacon crossing that was offset by about a half a block from the intersection. I think it's important to note that this is the only intersection on Cutler between Washington and Carlisle, and there are no crossings on that entire stretch of roadway. So a lot of the crossing activity is occurring right at that intersection. There's the Stone Age Gym just to the west on the south side of the street. There are parking lots on the north side. And then the 21st Century Academy is also just south of that intersection on the east side of the intersection. And there's a lot of student activity. They do have a drop-off pickup, but as is often the case, the parents are often not using that route, and they are dropping off or picking up their kids on the north side of the street, and they're having to cross Cutler. There's no stop signs and no crossings there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So similar concerns that Councilor Lewis has, just because I've asked for stop signs, left-hand turns, speed humps, and every time we have the studies that come back, and it's kind of come back kind of tough in saying that we really can't do it because of legal reasons. So I've pulled those requests. I really appreciate Councilor Feeblecorn and her desire to do this because I think it's important, but I just see this as, I'm gonna support the legislation, but I'm gonna come with a list of stop signs from the community as well that we've been trying to get for several years, and I keep being told that the study doesn't merit some of these things being installed. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I just want to say that this is a really growing area of my district with the addition of the Green Jeans facility. We've got schools, we've got dance schools, we've got a climbing gym, and there's not a single crosswalk on that entire stretch of road, and it's quite dangerous. I share Councilor Pena's concerns about having these studies come back and say it's not warranted when anyone who walks on foot in that area can tell you that it is in fact warranted. And so with that, I just urge your support so that we can keep the students in that area safe.
Thanks. Counselor, seeing no other discussion, the motion is for a do pass, I believe, right? Or is it no record? Do pass? All those in favor say yes. Raise your hand. Yes. Any opposed? Seeing none. I believe there's not going to be any immediate action. You just want to move this to regular order. Great. Moving on. Counselor Bassan, R14.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R14 is approving and authorizing the mayor to execute a one-time grant agreement with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Early Head Start Program and providing an appropriation to the Department of Family and Community Services for fiscal year 2021 for the grant term of 4/1/2021 through 3/31/2023. I would like to move a do pass.
I'll second. Second from Councilor Feeblecorn.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if I can ask the administration to speak on this, as I'm a fan of grant money, but it would be great to have you all explain more about it.
Hello. Thanks for being patient.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Councilor Bassan. I'm sorry.
Would you introduce yourself to us, please? I'm so sorry.
Yes, my name is Dr. Donita Blackman-Mosley, and I am the division manager over the Division of Child and Family Development.
Thank you, Dr. Mosley.
And so what this appropriation of funds is, it's essentially entitlement funds. So all early Head Start grantees across the nation were awarded funds to kind of support offset costs for COVID-related reasons. And our award amount was $38,524, a very minuscule amount. However, it was based on our funded enrollment. That's how that amount was determined. And those funds will be used to provide additional support to our early childhood centers that focus around the COVID-19 pandemic and is ensuring the health and safety and well-being of the children that we serve while they're in our care.
Thank you very much. And while I'm a fan of grant money, I'm also a fan of protecting children. So thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
This is right up your alley then, Councilor Bassan. Councilors, any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand and say yes. Yes. Any opposed? This doesn't need a, Councilor Bassan, this doesn't need an immediate action, right? We're not needing this at the moment.
Mr. Chair, I will defer to the
Actually,
administration.
it looks like a grant term from last week, so why don't we do it?
Yeah. Okay, I would like to move immediate action.
Great. Second from Councilor Pena. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Next up, for Councilor Jones, I'm going to move R15. R15 approves and authorizes the acceptance of grant funds, right up Councilor Bassan's alley, from the state library, from the American Rescue Plan Act state grant appropriations to the Department of Arts and Culture, and the director is still here with us. Thank you. I'll move a do pass. Do we have a second? Second from all three of you. Thank you. Councilors, any discussion or questions or comments from the administration? Seeing none, all those in favor say yes. That matter carries unanimously. Mr. Padilla, is this immediate action request? I'll make a motion for immediate action. Do we have a second? Councilor Feeblecorn, I saw first. Councilors, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say yes. That matter carries unanimously. Move on to item K, R17. Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R17 is approving and authorizing the mayor to execute a one-time grant agreement with the New Mexico Early Childhood Education and Care Department via American Rescue Plan federal funds, and approving an appropriation to the Department of Family and Community Services Division of Child and Family Development for fiscal year 2022 for the grant term 9/21/21 to 9/30/2023. I move a do pass.
We have a motion for a do pass and a second on R17. Councilors, any discussion? I have one. Maybe this is from the administration. It says that the grant term was started in September of last year. Why do we just have this now, and can we spend the money?
Excellent,
Doctor, thank you.
excellent question. And so the funds were awarded last year, and essentially we've been in a holding pattern to get it through legislation as well as our internal fiscal pieces, getting all the pieces in place to be able to utilize the funds, start expenditures.
Thank you, ma'am. And Doctor, if we appropriate this, can the department still meet its goals or obligations even though we're a little late, sort of out of the gate?
We're fine because we have till 2023.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
Councilors, any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of R17 say yes. That matter carries unanimously. I mean, it's 6 months late. We might as well do it. Is that a motion for immediate action, Councilor Pena? From the administration's giving us the immediate action look. So we have a motion for immediate action. I'll second for the record. All those in favor say yes. That matter carries unanimously. Councilor Feeblecorn, last of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for President Benton. R19, approving and authorizing a certified local government subgrant and providing an appropriation to the Planning Department. I'll move a do pass.
The second from Councilor Bassan. Councilors, any discussion? I see Director Varela's here, and he's waited patiently, as has he, she, and Ms. Morris. Councilors, any questions? Or Ms. Morris, can you tell us just really quickly what this is for?
Mr. Chair, councillors, yes. This is a grant for, I believe, $12,000. It's a certified local government grant for the planning department to do the work to inventory and put in a potential listing for a historic district for the Encino Medical Arts area. This is a fine example of mid-century architecture and is coming up. Most of the buildings are about 60 to 70 years old. And so if these buildings are listed on the historic states and national registers, they would be able to get tax credits for restoration and rehabilitation work. So this grant would help make that nomination possible.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilors, any questions or comments from Director Varela since you're here? No, he says no. That's great. Councilors, any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say yes. Raise your hand. Thank you. That matter carries unanimously. Councilors, anything else? There being no further... What? Oh, now Ms. Morris wants immediate action.
Oh, immediate action, please.
Okay. I will make a motion for immediate action. Is that okay with the sponsor, with Councilor Feeblecorn for Councilor Benton? All those in favor say yes. That matter carries unanimously. Now, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for being here. We made it at 7 o'clock on the dot.